So thank you all for coming today to this session. Just to get a sense of who all is in the room, if you wouldn't mind dropping into the chat your name, what's your affiliation, like where you work, and if it's not in your affiliation, the state you're coming from, just to give me a better handle on which states we have represented here, and that'd be immensely helpful. I'm just looking as people are. Okay. Yeah, thank you all for dropping that into the chat. Thank you. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick word in case any of you aren't familiar with who I am. I'm a Denver-based consultant, and I've linked to my LinkedIn page here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to share these slides after the event. If not, I'm more than happy to. If you email me directly, I can just email you the slides. I'm a consultant specializing in dual and concurrent enrollment policy. I spent 20 years at Education Commission of the States. If you're not familiar with that organization, it's a state-based here, or it's an organization based here in Denver that serves education policymakers across role groups across the 50 states as a nonpartisan organization working on issues from early learning through post-secondary and workforce. And it's an ideal place to work on dual and concurrent enrollment because, as you know, it's not just a K-12 issue, it's not just a higher ed issue, it's not just for governors or legislators or state board members or higher education officials, it's all of the above and then some. So you get a sense from these bullets like some examples, not a complete list, of the kind of work that I was doing at ECS on dual and concurrent enrollment, as well as other high school and post-secondary transition policies. You'll see in the reports link there, that's a link to my publications page on LinkedIn. So you can peruse the publications, that at least public-facing publications that I've done on dual enrollment over the last decade plus. And you see state policy research and legislative regulatory tracking. I actually started doing 50 state research on dual and concurrent enrollment back in 2006 in preparation for the first iteration of the 50 state database on dual and concurrent enrollment. And I did several updates to that resource until I left ECS in 2019. And then in 2019, I created Zenth Consulting, still working directly with states, with foundations, national and regional organizations such as College and High School Alliance, NACEP, Complete College America, others, again, focusing on dual and concurrent enrollment, but also doing some work on other topics that I covered at ECS, including STEM and computer science and some other high school and transition issues. So where we're going today is I'll give you an overview of funding for equity for any of those of you who are not familiar with this resource. It was published in 2019, and there's a forthcoming update. I don't know the exact date of when that's going to be released, but it's bringing things up to speed from the last 5 years in terms of which states fall into which categories in terms of their dual enrollment funding models. And I want to highlight here that the update will include an appendix that provides a short summary of each state's dual enrollment funding model, just 2 or 3 sentences, as well as noting where there's been policy enhancements over the last 5 years. And then we're going to leave some time at the end for Q&A. These are some sample questions that we might discuss during the Q&A. That said, I want to make this as helpful to all of you as possible. So if there are questions that come up as I'm going through the slides, please don't hesitate to drop those in the chat. And I hope that our moderator from North Carolina can draw my attention to those as I'm presenting, since I don't necessarily see what's on chat as I'm sharing the screen. Or if you'd like to save those questions for the end, that's totally fine too. And so this is the cover of the 2019 version of Funding for Equity, and is targeted to state leaders and their staff, so legislative legislators, governors, state board members, higher education board members, and staffs of those organizations, as well as state agency and system office staff. And so when I was at UCS, I would constantly get the question from state policymakers, like, just tell me which is the very best state funding model that my state should copy. And I would try to explain to them that there's no cookie cutter solution, that each state's funding model really depends a lot on sort of the political and financial sort of philosophies of that state, and what will fly in one state will definitely not fly in another state. And so this report is intended to walk policymakers through these different options and allow them to think through, what's the equity rationale? Why, how will it benefit students from an equity perspective by adopting, this model versus that model? And it also provides some trade-offs, what benefits will you see from the student perspective, or from the institution or district or other perspective if you adopt this model? And on the flip side of that, what challenges or barriers or what resistance might you face from any of those constituencies if you were to adopt this model? And then it provides some questions for state leaders to ask themselves as they assess, is this the right fit for my state? Will this fly or will this not fly given the circumstances in my particular state? And then it highlights some best practices and lessons learned from states that have already adopted that particular model. And so we'll quickly go through each of these different models. And for each, I'll provide just examples. We don't have time today, and I don't think you want to hear all the benefits and challenges that are laid out in the report for each particular model. But I'll just give a sort of high-level overview of some of those benefits and challenges. And so the first model is the state pays. So it's a legislative appropriation, or it's built into the state funding system or something like that. That students pay nothing, that it's, the district or higher education institution submits for reimbursement from a state agency. And you can see here that for some of these states, there's a footnote, and that's where, at least in 2019, there were 2 or more models within a state. And this was one of those funding models, and the footnote lists what the other funding models were. In the 2024 update, we're going to pull back a little bit because in some cases, the other model that's cited here no longer exists, or it's very rarely used. And 95% of students are enrolled through the state pays model. There's really no reason for us to highlight any other model in the state. And so you can see here, obviously, when the state pays, there's no financial barrier for students to participate. But on the flip side of that, there may be constraints on the number of courses or the grade levels for which students may access the program. So in Oklahoma, it's primarily 11th and 12th graders. In some other states, they say, oh, it's only X number of courses that you can access for free. And then after that, it's either locally determined how much the student might pay for tuition, or there's a state ceiling set on the amount of tuition that an institution might charge a student, which may pose an access barrier down the road. Also, the state reimbursement rate for post-secondary institutions typically is lower than what institutions would receive in terms of tuition or state reimbursement for a regularly matriculated student. And I should underscore that even though the state might pay, in the absence of other efforts to ensure that there are enough teachers who are credentialed to teach these courses, if these courses are offered at the high school, or there's an opportunity for a faculty member to travel to the high school, or there's access to online courses where that's a viable option. It's on a CTE course that's requiring certain equipment and facilities, without, or the notification of families, especially for families who may be first generation or unaware that these opportunities are available. Without all of those other factors, with all of the other pieces of the puzzle in place, it may run counter to the intentions of the law and exacerbate equity gaps, so that the families who are aware of these opportunities and are in well-staffed high schools who have teachers who are equipped to teach these courses and so on may have greater access, and those other high schools or those students from less advantaged backgrounds may see less access. So moving on to a combination of state and district pay. Again, the obvious benefit here is that students don't pay anything, at least in terms of tuition. And I might add here that this report looks only at tuition. It's not looking at textbooks, fees, transportation, et cetera, which I recognize would also maybe pose challenges to student access. That said, I'm also doing a report right now. It's an update, an expansion upon a 2021 report that I did for SRAB and its Midwestern counterpart, the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. That'll include an update to that information on the entity responsible for textbooks as defined in state policy, whether it's the district or the student or the family, or whether policy is silent. So be looking for that in terms of who covers the textbook responsibility in the 50 states. I should also add here that this report is just looking at dual enrollment. It's not looking at early college models, including P-TECH. And dual enrollment being defined here as college courses offered to high school students, regardless of location, instructor type, modality, et cetera. So again, the benefit here is that students don't pay anything in terms of tuition, and the challenges, some challenges would be the same as under the state pays model, but in addition, some districts may resist offering or promoting this opportunity if they stand to lose some of their per pupil revenue for paying tuition for students.
Jennifer, there's a question in the chat. If you don't, maybe
yeah.
you'd want to address it now because it's about the state pays model.
Yeah, let's go back.
I'll go ahead and just read it out. It says, in the state pays model, should all students be able to attend tuition free? This is not the case in South Carolina. Students pay at about half of community colleges across the staff. I think it means state, about half across the state. Or is this only about courses taught at the high school?
Yeah, so I think if I remember correctly, South Carolina is listed here for a CTE option, not for gen ed and all CTE courses. In these other states, I think it's safe to say Louisiana would be another example. I think that was just for a CTE option in 2019, and now it's changed. In these other states, generally it's both for general education courses and CTE courses. When the 2024 update comes out, you'll be able to see with that little 2 to 3 sentence descriptor for each state. Is it all courses? Is it just CTE, or is it just gen ed, or that sort of thing? Or is there a limit on the number of courses that students can access? But ideally, students would have all students would have access to at least a certain number of courses paid for by the state at least 11th or 12th grade. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure which person asked that question, but
oh, it was me. Sorry, I can come off mute. Sorry, it was me. Yeah, it does answer it. I'm still not sure in South Carolina that it holds for even all CTE courses.
Yeah, in some states. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But definitely not we've been doing some work on this exact topic in South Carolina and looking at, and we've been talking to the school districts and community and technical colleges, as they call them there, about what people are paying, and at some of them students have to pay full tuition and minus a lottery supplement if they take at least 2 courses, but the range of what students pay is pretty significant. So I was just curious because it says student pays no tuition there up at the top. So
yeah, I had to go back to my notes to see in 2019 what program was cited here for South Carolina, and you see also Kansas in 2019. The state was funding what's called Excel for CTE, or I might be getting that slightly wrong, but it was where there was a certain list of CTE courses, tiered courses that led to an industry recognized credential that were on a state approved list. So not every CTE course, but a limited number that were recognized by the state. So we can chat after this call offline about what's going on in South Carolina. And
yeah, I would love that. Actually, that would be great. That would be helpful to me too. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. So were there any questions related to state or district pays, state and district pay?
There's just one other question in the chat about the state PACE model, and it just says, in the state PACE model, is that paying for 2-year and 4-year dual enrollment providers?
Yeah, that again varies by state. Looking, I don't remember if there's, yeah, for New Hampshire, for example, it's only courses offered through community colleges. And at that time, it was just STEM and CTE courses that were on a approved list of community college courses. Since then, they've revised the statute so that it's not just STEM and CTE courses, it's also some gen ed courses that are on a state approved list, but it's still through just community colleges. In the other states, and there have been some changes to the policies since in North Carolina, yeah, I think it's both 2 and 4 years. Anyway, by and large, for these other states, it's both public 2 and 4 years, typically not private institutions. Okay. Were there any questions before we move on the combination of state and district pay? Okay. Not hearing anything, so let's move ahead. And if there are any questions that come up, we can answer those in the Q&A at the end of our time together. So the third model under which students pay nothing is where the district pays. And so this may be, for example, in Colorado, there in the local agreement between the school district and the post-secondary partner, they determine what amount the district is going to pay. Oftentimes it's little to nothing because the course is being offered at the high school by an approved instructor. But there is a ceiling set in statute on the amount that may be paid by the district. And I think it's the average community college in-state resident tuition for that course. And it also varies by state. In Iowa, again, it's locally negotiated, or sorry, that's another model. So there's a smaller number of states that do this. And you're going to see some changes in this with the 2024 updates. Again, the benefit obviously is that students don't pay anything. Some of the challenges are the same as either state pays or state and district pay. But with the added challenge that if you're a small district, maybe a rural district, or you're an under-resourced, urban or other setting district, or you're in a district that's seeing declining enrollment, where you're already losing the amount of per pupil funding you're getting from the state, but you're having to staff the same number of teachers and other instructional or non-instructional staff, you may have to make some really hard decisions in terms of how many courses you can offer, in what subject areas. Maybe there's a cap on the number of students you can serve through this program. So you have to set maybe some eligibility requirements that under other circumstances you wouldn't have to set. So it may constrain access in that regard in those particular districts. Or again, if the district stands to lose money, as in the previous model, they may not be incentivized to offer it or offer a wide variety of courses, or they may not be incentivized to provide broad communication about this opportunity, or they may promote AP or IB over dual and concurrent enrollment because they don't stand to lose as much funding from those models as from dual and concurrent enrollment. Were there any questions about this model before we move on? Okay, so let's move ahead. And so this model is the model under which students pay something. So the cost might be split between the state and the district, or the state and the student, or the district and the student. In Oregon, it's one example where its costs are split oftentimes 3 ways between the state and the district and the student. So this could increase program reach because it's tuition burden isn't shared exclusively by the state or the district. It's spread around a little bit more. So there may be lifts on the caps on the number of courses that students might take, or the grade levels could be grades 9 through 12 instead of just 11 through 12 if there are limitations just within state and district funding. Challenges obviously some of the same as the state pays, state and district pay, and district pays. However, with the added challenge that if the student is bearing some of that cost, if the state doesn't set parameters on the amount of tuition that a student may be charged, some students, especially low-income students, may be priced out of participation, or they may be limited on the number of courses that their families can afford for them to enroll in. Any questions on this one before we move on? Okay. So the last model, and in the 2024 update, I think we're going to combine local decision with policy silent, because there is a fair amount of overlap. There are some states where policy is silent on who pays tuition, but in practice, it really is a local decision in terms of is it the student, is it the school district, is it the post-secondary institution, is it some combination thereof that are sharing the tuition cost? And if so, what amount of tuition is being charged to each of those, to either the school district or the student or both? And so this is the most common model, as you can see. And when we add in the policy silent states, it's going to be an even larger set of states that are colored in for this particular map. Um, Obviously, the big benefit here is that policymakers can find agreement on this model more easily than on the other models, because they can see that, you know, it's up to the school district and the post-secondary partner who's paying. So it's not, there's not a sort of, you know, burden on the policymaker in terms of, are we going to commit to one of these other models, and, you know, maintaining that appropriation if it requires a legislative appropriation year in and year out. And also allows for local flexibility. So perhaps there's a local business or philanthropy or what have you who can step in and cover whichever costs are not covered by the school district at the post-secondary partner. So that could potentially broaden access to more students, to more courses. However, the big challenge here is that of all the funding models described in this report, there's the greatest potential for inequities in participation and access from one district or one high school to another across the state. You may have a student in one school district where the students are paying nothing, everything is covered by other entities, and the next district over, students are being charged the same tuition as regularly matriculated students, and there's little opportunity for coverage even for low-income students, and so relatively few students have access to college level courses in high school. So this is the last model we're going to discuss, and I'm going to pivot now to some examples, just like 5 examples of states that made significant policy changes in the 5-year interim since this report was first published. Does anybody have any questions on the local decision model before we move on? Okay, so let's jump into the 2024 updates. Again, I'm not sure when the 2024 update is going to be released. My best guess would be late spring or summer, but don't hold me to that. So obviously it'll have updated maps reflecting policy changes over the last 5 years. There will be some minor updates to the actual content of the report in terms of maybe some updated state data on number of students participating for different models, or state examples from the best practices and lessons learned pullouts. We're also going to have some information on, you know, if, you know, granted that there's no cookie cutter solution in terms of one state model for states to consider, I think that we're going to include maybe 5 or so key state models for other states to consider, because they do tend year in, year out to have higher percentages of high school students enrolled in college courses, and, you know, why those state models may be worthy of consideration by other states. And then there's also going to be a 50-state appendix that will include a glossary of different states' program models, because what might be called early college in Maine is actually dual and concurrent enrollment in another state, or in Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, some other states, concurrent enrollment is broadly used regardless of whether the course is being offered at the high school by a high school instructor or a faculty member or at the college. Provide a 2 to 3 sentence summary of each state's funding model or models where there's more than one model, as well as a separate table that summarizes where those states, for those states that offer reduced or no tuition for low-income students, a quick 2 to 3 sentence summary of those state approaches, and they really vary from state to state, whether it's a scholarship that students apply for, or whether it's a tuition waiver, regardless of having, eliminating some sort of application process, what have you. So we'll jump in, just kind of looking at some common trends that I saw as I was looking at policy changes over the last 5 years. The big one, obviously, is equity-minded revisions to state dual enrollment funding models. So there are more states that are in that state pays category than we saw in 2019. And another big equity-minded change that people might not necessarily not be top of mind as an equity-minded revision, but in practice it really is, where states are saying that post-secondary institutions will apply directly to their state agency for reimbursement. And so it takes away that paperwork burden from high schools or districts or students, where they have to, submit paperwork to their school district that the school district then has to submit to the state institution of higher education, or state post-secondary governing board, or SEA, the state education agency. And so, the districts, when they previously had that paperwork burden, or students might say, oh, we're just going to offer AP or IB. This is, a lot of extra staff time that we're not being compensated for. So it could broaden access in terms of, streamlining the process. When these states also implemented these policy changes, particularly in states where the state pays, either for low-income students or all students, there's typically also an added program reporting requirement to ensure that programs are serving a broader number of students, a broader diversity of students in terms of financial background, what have you. And so it's typically where the district and or the post-secondary institution are required to report to their respective state agency on numbers and backgrounds of students, the types of courses that students were enrolled in, number of courses that students successfully completed, et cetera. There's some new state appropriations as part of these state revisions. And then also some states were using federal funds beyond Perkins funds, for example, ARPA funds, to cover dual enrollment. Prior to COVID times, it was primarily just Perkins funds that states were using in terms of federal funds to cover some dual and concurrent enrollment expenses, including tuition, but not only tuition costs. And so Washington is the first of 5 states that we'll talk about today in terms of significant policy changes since 2019. There were more states, I didn't want to boil the ocean, that made policy changes in 2019, but I'm just limiting it to 5 in terms of just to keep our time under control. If you have questions about other states, feel free to contact me offline, or if your state made a change that you're not seeing in these 5 states, feel free to chime in when we get to the discussion/Q&A section. So Washington State in 2023 passed legislation that changed their old model for funding college and the high school, which is where a course is offered typically by a high school teacher during the school day at the high school. And under the old statute, the student would pay unless the district and the post-secondary partner had arrived in an alternative agreement. And I don't know how common it was for districts and post-secondary institutions to have the district cover or some external funds cover it, what have you. But statute set the tuition at a maximum of $65 per credit hour that again was passed on to the student unless there was another agreement that had been reached by the district and the post-secondary partner. There were some state subsidies for 11th and 12th graders in some districts. I think these tended to be small districts or rural districts, as well as some opportunities for low-income students, but it was a limited number of courses. I think it might have been like 6 credit hours. I could be wrong. Under the legislation that was passed last year, the state pays, and beginning in the omnibus bill for 2023-2025, the legislature was required to appropriate funds for college and the high school to the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges and for public four-year institutions. And these funds would be allocated the following year. So if a student took a course in 2023, fall 2023, they would apply in the 2024-25 fiscal year for funds from this state allocation. Um, Public institutions, and this gets a little, I'm oversimplifying it for the purpose of this slide. If there's someone from Washington on this call, they can unpack this a little bit more, either now or during the Q&A. So statute does set a per course ceiling. It's around 20 students for a total course. And the amount that an institution could be um, uh, reimbursed for that course varies depending upon whether the course was being offered by a community or technical college or a public four-year college or four-year research university. But I think it was a reimbursement for $300 per student for course until an institution reached that course ceiling for the course, and then it was that flat rate per course. Is there anybody from Washington on the call who wants to jump in and add a little context to this slide? Okay. So next state is Texas, and in 2023, they also passed legislation, but it's focused on covering tuition and other costs, for example, textbooks, fees, et cetera, for low-income students. And it's called the Financial Aid for Swift Transfer, or FAST program. And the tuition responsibility for non-low-income students stays the same as it was prior to this legislation, where it's a local decision between the school district and the post-secondary partner. And it's interesting that, and this is the only state where I've seen this, it's not just a student who's low income in that given school year that they're applying to enroll in a dual credit course. It's a student who is free or reduced lunch eligible in any of the 4 years leading up to that course enrollment in a dual credit course offering. And so it's, you know, as I mentioned, not just tuition, but other course expenses. Um, Public institutions are required each year to submit to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board whether they opt into participating in the program or they opt out of participating in the program. And institutions who do participate receive an allotment. I believe this is just public institutions, receive an allotment for each student based on the tuition rate that they've agreed upon with their school district partner. And the can be no more than the $55 per credit hour tuition rate that's set each year by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. I understand for 2025 fiscal year, that's bumped up to around $56 per credit hour. Is there anybody from Texas who would like to add any context for this particular program? Okay. Moving on to West Virginia, prior to passage of this legislation in 2023, it was, I believe, locally determined the amount of tuition that was paid, but it was typically reduced tuition that was paid by the student, or perhaps a combination of the district and the student. But this pilot, and that was obviously posing a barrier, especially for low-income families. This pilot program is a 4-year program that's scheduled to end August of 2027, unless the legislature moves to extend the pilot or create this as a permanent program. The legislature last year created an appropriation that would cover tuition and fees for all eligible students in eligible courses in public 2- and 4-year institutions that opted to participate. And it's my understanding that nearly all, if not all, of the public 2- and 4-year institutions in the state have agreed to participate in the program. And institutions are reimbursed $75 per credit hour as long as funds are available. I think they may have last year had to pull back the number of courses that could be covered through the program because of the huge uptick in interest and participation. Is there anyone from West Virginia on the call who'd like to jump in and weigh in on this one?
I am not in West Virginia, but so I'm with the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, and West Virginia is in our
Oh.
district, and we are doing research on this. And I'm so glad. It's so funny because I actually was just sending them an email today about this exact topic, because the wording is very confusing, because in the state code, it says what you have here, that the tuition and fees are fully covered. But then it talks about but then the institutions are saying, yeah, but we're just getting $75 per credit hour, which does not equal the fees and tuition. So
Are you saying
there
that the
seems
institution, some institutions are charging districts or students for that remainder that is covered by that?
no, but the way the code is worded, so even these two bullets you have here, like they contradict each other a bit, right? Like tuition and fees are fully covered, but then the institutions are only getting $75 a credit hour, which doesn't fully cover tuition and fees.
Yeah, I
Um,
should have said that eligible students pay nothing for tuition and fees. If they're enrolled in approved courses.
Okay, right. But the code actually says what you have there. It is it I think it is, which Tessa just put in the chat, that the college takes the loss. I think that's correct, but the code is a bit um a bit hard to navigate. But we also got we've been talking to some of the presidents and also got some feedback that actually the course fees are left up to the student or the school district
Oh,
to
really?
pay. Like we got feedback that says this is the feedback we got: costs for course fees, book supplies, transportation are left to the student or school district. That's the feedback we got from the presidents. I'm trying to get confirmation from the system, but yeah, it's a little confusing.
Yeah, and the emergency rules for both the community college system and the four-year system, I thought it said that fees, whatever fees that an institution would charge a matriculated student are not to be charged to a high school student under this program. I could be mistaken, but that's my recollection from reading those emergency rules.
That's what we thought too. So we're just trying to get clarity. I'll let
Yeah.
you know what we find out.
Yeah, and I'd appreciate that. Yeah, I should add that, as I mentioned earlier, typically in these state pay programs, the state reimburses the institution at a lower rate than the tuition that the institution would receive for a regularly matriculated student. And $75 per credit hour is pretty typical, is what we're seeing across other states in the state pays model. So it's not, you know, way out of line with what other states are reimbursing institutions for these students. Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking at the time. We have a little over 10 minutes left, so I'm going to move very quickly so that we have time for Q&A and discussion. So the fourth state we're looking at here is Maryland. And this is an example where it wasn't where the state is categorized in a different place. So it's still state and district and student pay for Maryland. So this district covers tuition, which is reimbursed. They pay it at 75% rate for up to 4 courses. And for community colleges, it's either 75% of what they would normally charge for tuition for that course, or 5% of the per pupil foundation amount that the district receives for that student for that portion of the school day. After that 4 courses under the old model, the district would pay either 90% of the cost of tuition that an institution would regularly charge a matriculated student, or the lesser of that 5% of the per pupil funding, or 90% of the community college tuition for that course. Under this new structure, and I understand this is a real headache for school districts because you have to figure out, okay, well, has the student changed districts? Are they still under that 4 courses or not? If they took 3 courses at the other district or whatever, or just, there's a variation from one college to another, especially when districts were in agreements with multiple colleges, is becoming really confusing really fast. So this recent couple of years ago, they changed it to the district just pays 75% of the tuition for the public institution. Student may not be charged anything. And if the school district and the public institution had a different tuition arrangement prior to July 2020, they can continue with that prior agreement. And then every 2 years, which I don't have on the slide, but the statute also says that every 2 years, if not sooner, the district and the institution should revisit that tuition arrangement to see if they want to make any changes to it. And that would be in the local agreements that covers other components of the offering of dual credit to high school students. And then the last state we're going to look at here is New Hampshire, again, they're not changing their categorization. We saw them on the state pays on the very first map that we discussed. But under the old model, the state would cover up to 2 dual or concurrent enrollment courses taken through a community college in grades 10 and 11 and 12. So we're talking about a total of 6 courses if a student took 2 courses each of those 3 years. And actually in 2019, after I'd already finished the research for Funding for Equity, they added grade 10 because prior to that, it was just 2 courses each in grades 11 and 12 that were covered by the state. And these courses had to be from a list of approved CTE or STEM courses that community colleges were offering. Under the policy that was passed a couple of years ago, now they're covering tuition for up to 4 courses in each grades 10, 11, and 12. So a total of potentially 12 college courses in high school. And they did away with that limitation on just covering STEM and CTE community college courses. Now there's a broader list of community college courses that students can access through this state funding. So we have about 10 minutes left. I'd like to move on, open it up for discussion. If there's questions that came up while I was presenting earlier, if the moderator wants to present those questions, or if people want to chime in on any of these questions or other questions, we have about 10 minutes to do that. So, yeah.
I'm just curious where you got your data from, because I saw you had Alabama labeled as student pays, and we've had state allocations since 2015, which have increased steadily over that time.
Yeah, in 2019, and I don't know if the allocation, yeah, so you said this was back in 2015. I believe for the 2019 version, I sent information to most state agencies or system offices. I haven't done that for all states for the 2024 updates, but I will be following up with the community college system office. If there's somebody in particular you think I should reach out to for confirmation of the Alabama information, if you could shoot me an email after this call, then I'll be sure to follow up with that person, or maybe that person is you. But other than that, I was going through state statute regulation for those states that have post-secondary governing board, any sort of policy manual or guidelines that they have in any of those sort of non-regulatory documents. And then in most cases where there's an appropriation that falls outside of statute regulation, those policy documents, then referencing that appropriation. I think Alabama is relatively unique in that they have in their board regulations that it's the responsibility of the student unless otherwise covered by the district or private source, et cetera, or tuition is waived. And I think for virtually every other state, it's spelled out, and Nebraska's another exception, it's spelled out in policy that either state pays or district or student or what have you. Other questions?
I have a question.
Mhm.
What would you suggest for the states who do not have any type of, current dual enrollment funding implementations? How would you go about, what would be the best way to go about trying to figure out how does a state get that started? How
And
do you
Erica,
do
which state are you from?
Pennsylvania?
Okay, yeah, I didn't include Pennsylvania. They made a funding change as well in the last couple years. I would say, and I'm saying this because when I was at ECS, I actually worked with some states on this process. It's helpful to get buy-in from legislators who understand the value of dual and concurrent enrollment, not just the value to students and families in terms of hopefully reducing college expenses because they've completed courses in high school, but also getting a coalition of school districts and post-secondary institutions, saying that this is a benefit to our school district, this is a benefit to our community, this is a benefit to the state in terms of return on investment. There are some states, Colorado is one of them. I can send you a link after this call if you'd like, if you send me your email, where they've done a return on investment, and they say that, for this cohort of high school students, they were more likely, the students who completed a college course in high school or college courses in high school are more likely to matriculate and persist, and that results in higher state tax revenues, reduced costs in terms of social supports or, you know, criminal justice or whatever. There are several states that have done these kind of return on investment things. And so providing data to policymakers to make the case for how this benefits not just students, but the whole state can be really be beneficial. And we can also have a follow-up conversation later on if you'd like. Does that help?
It does, yes, thank you. And you'll leave your email address at the end?
Yep, there it
Okay.
is.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we just have a few minutes left. I see that Renee Nelson raised her hand. Renee?
Hi, I'm from New York and there's a lot, I mean, I think we're considered like a silent state funding for dual enrollment. I work for a charter organization where we're really trying to make this an option for our students. We see a lot of the benefits. We've, spearheaded having 5 partnerships with different organizations, whether they're the middleman or whether it's directly with the college. But it's just the funding that is just always, a stop that that considers us to grow the program every more. Like we're all Title I schools, so we do get a lot of negotiation opportunities, and then that does lead to a reduction in the tuition. But I'm just wondering if you have any kind of leads of where we can maybe write to. I hear you talking about a legislator, or if you have any names or someone that I could probably reach out to, because like whenever I talk to other schools that are just like gen ed schools and not a specialized school, like an early college school, they're saying the kids pay for it. And it's all nuanced in terms of like one-on-one situations where maybe a student does qualify for financial aid. And so they're tapping into their Perkins, or they're writing letters and showing incomes, like tax information and stuff like that, to get a reduction in their tuition. So any kind of information would be helpful, because
And
we don't
you're
know
outside the city?
we're in the city.
Oh, you
Yeah.
are in the city. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because I know CUNY offers the College Now program, which I believe covers tuition, at least for a certain number of courses for students.
Right, but for that,
Yep.
it's like the kids have to go there during the day, and
Yep.
then we really want to try to keep it in-house and things like that. And so, because that's where we see the most benefit, like our kids don't want to go and then come back.
Right.
Just in terms of like commuting. I mean, I know New York City seems like it's an easy commute to get from one place to another, but it's really not.
Right.
So
Yeah, we're almost out of time. Maybe we could schedule a follow-up time because New
that'd
York
be
really
great.
is in unique circumstance than the other 40 minutes.
Yeah, okay, that'll be great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, so we have according to my clock, 1 minute left. Is there one last quick question that we can answer before we have to jump off?
There's one question in the chat, and I don't know if this is a quick question, but someone asked, can you share which state did the ROI research on dual enrollment?
Yeah, Colorado. If anybody would like to see that study, I think it was 2020. I think some other states, but off the top of my head, I can't remember. There are actually some states, Utah and Indiana, that have it built into their statute that state agency is required annually to report to the legislature the tuition savings that accrued to families because the tuition was covered partially or fully by the state. And I could send you samples of that legislation as well if anybody on this call is interested. So I realize we're out of time. Thank you all so much for your participation and attendance today. Don't hesitate to use this email address to reach out to me with any follow-up questions, or if you'd like to schedule a time to chat. Glad to answer any questions you might have offline. So best of luck as you move forward with your funding adventures in your own states, and take care. God bless.